Welcome to our channel. Tonight we journey to the English countryside in the late 1930s, to Greyfriars Hall, a gracious house of mullioned windows and beech-shaded lawns, where the clink of glass against silver seems to echo old triumphs and older regrets. The weekend promises table talk and tennis whites, but beneath the polish runs a current dark as you walk by the lake. It is among such respectable hedgerows that the most perplexing disappearances may glide like mist, leaving only a trace of perfume and a question no one cares to voice. One guest will vanish, cleanly and possibly, as though the air itself conspired, and what remains will be a circle of faces, each politely composed and each hiding a chapter you will wish to read. Stay with me until the very end, for this mystery reveals how a single overlooked habit, noticed by a steady mind, can unwind the whole. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoy these stories and the work I do here, please consider subscribing to the channel. You can also join our membership for ad-free videos and exclusive mysteries. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Reading your words is a quiet pleasure. Now, settle in with a hot cup of coffee. Stay curious, and let us begin. The Vanishing Weekend Guest IT was on a Tuesday, rain in London, but the sort that refuses to make a point, that I received Sir Roland Carews' invitation. The envelope was thick, the paper faintly scented with something I could not place. Not lavender, not verbena, but the restrained compromise of a reputable chemist. The hand was firm, a soldier's hand, each letter marching with economical certainty across the page. "My dear fellow," he wrote, "it would gratify me greatly if you would spend the weekend at Greyfriars. A few friends, nothing elaborate. I am anxious, nevertheless, that all should go smoothly. You have a way of seeing sense where others see smoke. Yours, R. Carew." One does not refuse an old comrade of one's father, nor the prospect of fresh air after a fortnight of stale committee rooms and sandwiches with a mean relation of ham. I sent my acceptance, and on Saturday took the early train down, the countryside unrolling itself in wet greens and blurred hedgerows, like a watercolor that had been left in the rain. Greyfriars Hall announced itself long before one reached the door, a stretch of drive curving between beeches, a lake glimpsed to the right with a modest island where something, a heron perhaps, stood motionless as a thought one does not wish to chase. The house was of warm stone, its ivy clipped into obedience, its windows catching at the late afternoon as though saving the light for later. A clock struck the quarter, not loudly, but with a sort of domestic assurance. "You are expected," it seemed to say, "and those who are expected shall arrive on time." Sir Roland himself met me in the portico. He had the build of a man who had once been spare by necessity and had since permitted a measure of comfort. A neatly kept mustache, gray at the edges, lent him something of the regimental, but the eyes, steady, courteous, and faintly troubled, belonged to a host who hopes for the best and is prepared for the rest. "My dear chap," he said, gripping my hand with warmth that contrived not to be effusive. "Beastly weather up in town? We've had a mist all morning, but the lawns will thank it. Come in, come in. Eleanor is somewhere issuing last orders to the flowers." The hall was one of those rooms that instruct you how to behave merely by existing. Oak so polished it reflected one like a counsel with a better argument. Persian rugs that had not the least intention of drawing attention to themselves. 2 suits of armor flanking the great staircase, dignified as elderly footmen. On a table stood a silver bowl of roses, cream, with that lime-tinted edge which suggests the gardener understands that elegance and health are not mutually exclusive. Behind the flowers, a portrait of an ancestor stared down with resigned propriety. Some Carew or other who had paid taxes and kept his nerve. Lady Eleanor Carew appeared with the roses, or rather with their success. She was not a beautiful woman, if the word must have drama in it, but she had the sort of fine bones that are aristocracy's apology for everything else. Her gown, mushroom silk, with a soft fall at the wrist, spoke of a mind that liked quiet things. She welcomed me gently, as though I were a tune she remembered but could not quite hum. "You are kind to humor my husband," she said, in a voice that rested upon the ear like a hand on a book about to be closed. "We are a small party. The house always feels larger when it rains." "A house ought to feel large," I returned, with a gallantry that was almost sincere. "It suggests it has room for contentment. Or for secrets," she said, and smiled in a manner that accused no one of anything. The guests, Sir Rowland informed me, had been arriving by twos and ones all the morning and early afternoon. A variety, he added, in the tone of a man both proud of his cellar and uncertain whether one bottle may have been corked. I changed and went down to the library, a room as sound as a proverb. There I met Miss Beatrice Latham, the novelist, who was making notes in a little brown book as calmly as another woman might measure wool. She had a sort of plain, clever face which can be improved by mischief and improved again by kindness, and I suspected she possessed both. Her hair, clipped short in a sensible wave, was the color of over-baked toast. She looked up, took me in rather as one appraises a chair for comfort and resilience, and nodded. "Ah," she said, "another Sir Rowland's sound men. I'm delighted. Sound men are so rarely heard. I confess myself no more than usually sound," at which she laughed. "You say that as if modesty were a disease you hope not to catch." She closed her notebook. "Well, here we are, the financier, the barrister, the widow, the scribbler, and a friend or two. A proper English assortment. Presently we shall be shown the gardens, told when the lake is safe, and asked to pretend the house isn't drafty. The financier? I asked Victor Harcourt. He carries his success like a cane, useful for pointing and for walking away. Handsome in a way that makes one feel untidy. And the barrister, Mr. Miles Renshaw. Very clean boots, very quick eyes, very ready to pounce upon a loose word. As for the widow, Mrs. Clara Denham, she looks as if she has been written by someone who knows little of widows and much of theater. Unkind, Miss Latham. Accurate, she said, without malice. But do not mind me. Ink makes one cynical. We were joined by Renshaw shortly afterwards, a tall fellow with a clever mouth and the expression of a man who would have preferred to win a case before meeting you. He greeted us with the smoothness of polished wood and proceeded, without noticeable effort, to suggest that his time was valuable and that he could not be blamed for having brought it with him. Victor Harcourt entered as Renshaw was demonstrating the law's capacity to be both precise and opaque. Harcourt's presence altered the air by half a degree, as the first drop of a storm warns a dog. He was, as Miss Latham had said, handsome. Dark hair bright with expensive attention, a smile rehearsed to look unrehearsed, and a waistcoat that would have summed a small tradesman's account. He shook hands with me as though our acquaintance had only been waiting for the right butler. Greyfriars is the proper place to remember that England exists, he observed, strolling to the fire with that air of not needing the warmth. In town we forget. In the country one is reminded. Hedges, taxes, and history. History is cheaper here, Miss Latham murmured. And more honest, said another voice, and into the room came Clara Denham. The word that presents itself is charming, but it is overused like a compliment from a nervous curate. She was slender, and the black of her dress had been chosen by a woman who understood both propriety and the theater. A string of seed pearls lay at her throat, demure as a prayer. Her eyes, a clear gray, had the trick of seeming to ask and to answer in the same glance. She greeted us all with quick friendliness, and I noticed, because I noticed such things, that she had not removed her gloves. The detail should have meant nothing. At the time, it meant that she was either about to go out, had just come in, or had an aversion to leaving traces. We made our polite way through talk of trains and weather, of a lawn that would be playable tomorrow if the clouds behaved with English decency. Presently Sir Rowland reappeared, straighter somehow, as a man who has decided to put his house in order by sheer civility. Another guest yet to arrive, he said. A family friend, of whom I am particularly fond. Quiet but dependable. He glanced at his watch, and, for a moment, the soldier returned, the habit of times and the knowledge of consequences. It was then the butler, a thin personage distilled from a long line of thin personages, entered and announced, in the tone of Westminster reading the results, Superintendent Battle. I had not expected police in plain clothes to be part of a weekend devoted to croquet and conversation. Yet there he stood, a large, square man, with a face that looked as though it had never hurried, and a gaze that suggested it never needed to. His suit was good but not eager. His hat, when he removed it, revealed hair that had given up early and found peace. He shook hands with Sir Rowland, not warmly but right. Evening, "Sir Rowland," he said. "Evening, Lady Eleanor." His voice was a steady bar of iron. He saw us all, and seeing us seemed content to file the knowledge away. When introduced to me, he inclined his head in a manner almost apologetic, as if of the trouble life sometimes is. "We are fortunate to have you," Sir Rowland said, in a way that carried more freight than he perhaps intended. "Just a friendly visit." Superintendent Battle returned. "I've taken a few days." He looked toward the long windows, where the mist was setting in, soft as silk. "Country is good for the lungs." Miss Latham's eyebrow made a note of this, and Renshaw's eyes measured the superintendent as one measures an opponent one hopes to underestimate. Harcourt smiled, as men do when a new player sits at the table. As for Mrs. Denham, the gloves tightened on her fingers. Dinner would be at 8. Before then, there were rooms to be admired and fires to be encouraged. Yet as we dispersed, it seemed to me the house had shifted almost imperceptibly, as a ship does when a new weight is taken aboard. Quiet men, I have learned, alter destinies not by force, but by remaining where they are until everyone else must move. Dinner that evening at Greyfriars was served in a long chamber that seemed to have collected centuries as a man collects stamps, arranged with care, shown with pride, but never entirely free of dust. Candlelight softened the corners, catching gilt frames and glass, and the silver on the table glowed with the quiet vanity of having been polished by generations of diligent hands. Sir Rowland, at the head, presided with a soldier's discipline softened by a host's courtesy. Lady Eleanor, at his right, lent grace to his firmness. Her hands, pale and fine-boned, rested on the tablecloth as though it were an altar. Superintendent Battle sat further down, grave but unassuming, a rock upon which the currents of conversation might break or flow. I confess, as I took in the company, that each face seemed at once ordinary and remarkable. Ordinary, for one expects a financier, a barrister, a widow, and a novelist in such a setting. Remarkable, because each carried something, an air, a shadow, a secret perhaps, that distinguished him from the catalogue of English dinner guests. Victor Harcourt, the financier, was a man in command of his reflection. His dark hair, glistening with care, lay in place as if fearful of disobedience. His smile was smooth, his voice low, his every gesture rehearsed to a fine exactness. He spoke of markets and companies, of the restless tide of capital, in phrases designed to suggest intimacy with powers invisible to the rest of us. Yet I fancied, watching him butter his roll with military precision, that he lived in dread of a sudden draft blowing all his calculations to the floor. Miles Renshaw, the barrister, was cut to another pattern. Tall, narrow, precise, his manner held the blade's edge of a cross-examiner. He asked questions with casual air, but his eyes waited keenly for the slip, the contradiction, the word that betrayed. He told an anecdote about a judge's blunder, and even as we laughed I saw that he had marked who laughed too loudly and who too little. His boots, as Miss Latham had remarked earlier, gleamed as if success could be seen in polish. Mrs. Clara Denham, the widow, was in black, but the black of fashion, not mourning. Her pearls caught the candlelight with demure insistence, and her gray eyes surveyed the company with a courtesy too swift, too shifting, to be anything but calculated. She told a charming story of her travels in Florence. Churches, pictures, and a gondolier who mistook her for an opera singer. All laughed. But I noticed that when Harcourt's gaze lingered upon her, her gloved hands twisted a little in her lap, as though the story had cost her more than its effect. Miss Beatrice Latham, the novelist, made no effort to charm, and thereby succeeded. She observed rather than participated, and her sardonic remarks fell like neat pins upon a cushion, sharp, orderly, and unlikely to be lost. When Harcourt spoke too glibly of his triumphs, she inquired sweetly whether triumphs were not improved by memory. When Renshaw expounded upon justice, she asked if justice were not merely law dressed for dinner. She fascinated me. She irritated the others, and she, I suspect, enjoyed both reactions equally. Lady Eleanor, in her gentle way, moved the company forward when talk threatened to stall. Her voice, always even, had that quality which soothes without commanding. Yet when she spoke to her husband, there was the faintest tremor, as though a string beneath the bow quivered with old anxiety. Sir Rowland, for his part, did his best to ensure harmony, but more than once I detected his glance at Battle, the sort of glance a man gives to a comrade when he feels the lines may break. As for Superintendent Battle, he took it all in with his steady, patient gaze. He spoke rarely, and when he did it was in the simplest phrases. "Indeed," he said, when Harcourt described the volatility of South American investments. "Quite so," when Renshaw delivered a crisp summary of a recent case. To Clara Denham, who pressed him upon whether he enjoyed novels, he replied, "I read them. They pass the time." Yet behind the iron bar of his voice, there was a silence that seemed fuller than other men's speech. After the soup and fish, the talk warmed. Harcourt spoke expansively of his London flat, its marble fireplace, its collection of French clocks, its balcony with roses that flourished in defiance of soot and scents. Clara laughed, but Beatrice Latham inquired if the roses were natural or purchased. "Ah, Miss Latham," he said smoothly, "in business, the natural and the purchase are often one and the same." Renshaw discoursed on politics, quick, clever, a touch too knowing. Lady Eleanor listened with patience, though I sensed she would rather have listened to silence. At one point she asked Battle whether he thought politicians were honest. He looked at her, steady as stone. "Some are," he said. The words hung like a weight, and no one pressed him further. When the pheasant was cleared and the pudding set down, the company seemed momentarily united in admiration of cookery's triumph. Even Beatrice Latham conceded the perfection of the sauce. Clara sipped her wine with delicate relish, though I fancied she drank for courage. Harcourt lifted his glass, but his eyes were not on the wine. They were on Clara, calculating. Renshaw, I thought, would have cross-examined them both on the spot, had etiquette permitted. Later, in the drawing-room, the women gathered about the fire while the men lingered with port. I found myself near Battle. He stood solid, glass in hand, surveying the flames. "A mixed company," I said, more to draw him than from conviction. He nodded. "Mixed," he agreed, and after a pause, "That's when things happen." "What sort of things?" I asked, smiling. "The sort that shouldn't," he replied gravely, "but do." I was left to consider this when Harcourt drifted nearer, all urbane charm. "Battle, is it? You're with the Yard, I believe? I've heard your name." His smile suggested flattery. His eyes measured advantage. Battle gave a little bow. "Nothing more. I've been there a while," he said. Nothing in his manner invited further questions. Harcourt's smile thinned. He turned away to Clara, who brightened, or pretended to, at his approach. The evening wound down with music on the gramophone, conversation in low tones, and the occasional glance at the clock. At 11, Lady Eleanor excused herself with grace. Sir Rowland soon followed. The rest drifted upstairs, save Miss Latham, who lingered over a final note in her brown book, and Battle, who stood by the window, looking out into the misted gardens as though the night might speak to him. And so the first evening ended. Yet I could not shake the impression that under the politeness, the laughter, the candlelight, something unsaid had walked among us at table, silent and insistent. The house seemed to listen. And I, though weary, went to my room uneasy, as though the weekend had already chosen its course. Morning came to Greyfriars Hall as a thing decided upon but not insisted upon. The mist, which had slipped about the lawns the previous evening like a shawl over a thoughtful shoulder, had tangled itself among the yews and cedars, and now lay in pale skeins along the lake. From my window I saw the island, a smudge of dark leafage, and the swan that patrols such waters with the self-respect of a magistrate. At breakfast the company was subdued in that English way which pretends to larks and blue skies, even as the eggs cool upon the plate. Sir Rowland, to do him justice, would not allow gloom to seat itself. He proposed a tour of the gardens, and Lady Eleanor added, with a faint smile, that the refectory roses would bear inspection if one approved of roses with opinions. Harcourt regretted a telegram, and excused himself to the library for a quarter of an hour only, which sounded like a promise given to an impatient creditor. Renshaw, precise as his cufflinks, offered to try the telephone after, just to see if London still exists. Miss Latham murmured that London always exists, it merely changes hats. Clara Denham was charming and inattentive at once, a manner I have only ever seen done well by women for whom attention has been both nourishment and poison. She wore a soft gray frock with a narrow belt, and, once again, the gloves. Paler this morning, almost the color of tea with too much cream. I noticed, too, a slim key on a ribbon at her wrist, tucked beneath the glove's edge, and wondered at it lightly. But then Battle came in, and the thought folded itself away for later. He offered no opinion on roses or London, only a level good morning, which seemed to steady the room as a paperweight steadies letters from flying. We dispersed about 10:30, some to the garden with Sir Rowland and Lady Eleanor, Harcourt to his telegrams, Renshaw to his telephone, Miss Latham to the East Terrace to examine the fog, a declaration that amused her, and I, by a habit that surprises me, found my feet carry me toward the library. It is an honest room. The library at Greyfriars, comfortable chairs of good conscience, a fireplace that remembers winters, and books that have been read often enough to have opinions, but not dogmas. The door was ajar. I tapped and entered on the instant to find that my tap had been unnecessary. The room was empty, save for the smell of tobacco which lingered as an afterthought. On the large desk lay a blotter, pens, a pile of notepaper with the Carew crest, and what arrested me? A drawer not quite closed, its brass handle giving a thin smile to the world. I am not an inquisitive man, but I am a tidy one. An open drawer in a careful house provokes the same instinct in me as a crooked picture. I stepped nearer. The drawer had been disturbed. Papers within lay at angles, as though a hand, not the owner's, had hurried. I touched nothing. A mark along the polish on the desk's edge suggested something put down and lifted again, quickly. Beside the blotter a small curl of ash had collected, gray-blue and singular, the sort that a cigarette leaves when it is tapped with impatience. Harcourt had spoken of telegrams, but telegrams, in my experience, do not require one to rummage in other men's drawers. I could not resist glancing at the wastebasket. It offered only the honest detritus of a house. Envelopes, a torn wrapping, the corner of a newspaper page. Nothing of consequence, which in such moments is almost a consequence in itself. When I turned to go, Superintendent Battle filled the doorway with his quiet bulk. He regarded me without surprise. I had the sudden sensation of being observed not from the moment he appeared, but from the moment I had thought of entering the room. "Library does you good," he said. "I find it so," I replied, feeling absurdly like a schoolboy with ink on his fingers. There's an atmosphere of decisions taken and then written down so one can bear them. He nodded, as if I had said something practical concerning boots. His eye took in a half-closed drawer, the tidy disorder. "Sir Rowland keeps his accounts in there," he observed. "Do you suppose he mislaid a figure this morning?" Battle did not answer the question I had asked. "It's best," he said mildly, "to leave drawers as you find them. I have touched nothing," I protested. "I know," he said, and stepped past me into the room. He did not touch anything either. He has, I think, a genius for not touching. I left him to the library and followed, at a civil distance, the sound of voices toward the East Terrace. The fog there lay low, not so much a veil as a deep breath. Miss Latham was seated upon the stone balustrade, sketching with words in her brown book. "Today," she read aloud as I approached, "the mist remembers things a house has not confessed." Then she shut the book on the sentence with satisfaction. That will do for a chapter. Does one wish one's crimes to be confessed by the weather? I asked. "Dear man," she said, "the English climate has been implying homicide since the Romans left. If we ever had perfect sunshine, we'd be forced to admit everything." A raised voice from the U walk below cut across our pleasantries. Not loud, but urgent. The tone of men who would rather speak quietly and cannot. I looked at Miss Latham. She cocked her head like a thrush. We did not move at once. Politeness holds one back, but the words rose, snatched by the moist air. "Not now, do you hear? It would be folly, folly." That was Renshaw's fast, crisp blade of a voice. "And I tell you," came Harcourt's answer, sleek and threatening, "that delays kill. The window closes. You of all men should understand opportunity." Opportunity for what? Renshaw almost spat. To fling one's career into the street? You're mad. Cowardice is often called prudence at the bar, Harcourt returned, with a laugh that did not laugh. There was a movement, footsteps on gravel, a brush of damp leaves, and then silence. Miss Latham and I exchanged a glance of conspirators who did not intend conspiracy. "Shall we," she suggested, "admire the refectory roses very far away from here?" We admired them conscientiously. Lady Eleanor joined us, offering a small branch to correct our ignorance. "This is Madame Caroline Testout. She pretends to be delicate, but in truth she would thrive on neglect and gossip." Her tone was lighter than her eyes. "Have you seen Clara?" She spoke of a walk. We had not. Lady Eleanor looked toward the lake. "She is a brave young woman," she said, and then, with a quiet emphasis that meant the opposite, "or she has learned to appear so." It was after luncheon that the day became a tale. The fog lifted into a fine gray. The lawns that had blurred reappeared with their accustomed right angles. Renshaw went to the billiard room and practiced shots that sounded like arguments. Harcourt vanished in the direction of the stables on a pretext about the car. Miss Latham settled to write in the morning room where the light, she said, would tell the truth without vanity. Sir Rowland was closeted with the estate manager, the two men's voices a steady murmur through an open door. Lady Eleanor wrote letters at a delicate desk that seemed to require apology each time a pen touched it. I walked toward the lake. Paths at Greyfriars behave as though designed by a mind that once believed in labyrinths and reformed. One meanders toward the water with shrewd inevitability. I came to the boathouse, a low timbered affair with a rowboat at its tether and an old brass padlock that had learned patience. From within there issued the faintest sound, like the sigh of its settling. I stood listening. Nothing more. The padlock was locked. The boat nodded at me as if to say that the lake, at least, was honest. It was then I saw Clara Denham. She stood upon the narrow strip of shingle at the far curve of the lake, a slim figure against the pale water. She was hatless, the wind lifting a strand of dark hair in a gesture both affectionate and careless. Her hands were clasped before her. The gloves were off, and the small key at her wrist gleamed in the weak sun. I called out. She started, turned, and for an instant regard and calculation fought in her face. Then she smiled. "How you frightened me," she said, in the tone of one who has decided it is best to be charmed. I had not thought anyone near. "The lake looks better from your side," I answered, which was true. "You have found the exact spot where the world pretends to be simple." Her eyes softened. "If one stands very still," she said, "one can persuade one's heart to believe it." She glanced at the island. "Do you suppose anyone ever lives there?" A hermit in a good tweed coat. "I should hope so," I returned. "It would be a comfort to know a sensible man is keeping watch." She laughed, an honest sound, and then the laughter died. "I must go back," she said quickly. "Lady Eleanor will think me rude." We walked together a few yards, and at the gate that leads up through the shrubbery she paused. A thread of silk, so fine as to be no more than a suggestion of silk, had caught and torn upon the rough wood, a wisp of gray like a breath on glass. She glanced at it with an expression I could not read, and with a deft movement wound it round her finger and tucked it away. "My worst gown," she said lightly. "It catches on everything." At tea there were two small disturbances. Trivial, yet they left a taste. The first was the arrival of a note for Harcourt, delivered by a groom whose boots spoke of some haste. Harcourt read it with an expression of polite blankness. Then, folding it into nothingness, he remarked that the village solicitor had misfiled a deed and that he must drive in before 6. The second was a quiet overture between Renshaw and Clara. He had been, all day, restless. Now he approached her with what in another man would have looked like kindness. "Mrs. Denham," he said, "if you will permit me, there are matters upon which you should be advised." She lifted her eyes, and whatever he saw there surprised him into silence. "Another time," he said stiffly, and stepped back. Evening fell early. A low wind combed the lawns. A scent of damp earth came in with the maids and the lamplight. The house drew in upon itself, as houses do when they remember winter. I went up before dinner to fetch a book I had not yet finished. On the landing outside the guest rooms I paused. There are those small sounds which one's ears report to one's mind before one knows why they matter. A soft click, the faintest scrape as of metal on wood. a door closing with the finality of discretion. I turned the corner and saw no one. The corridor was empty, but it was the sort of emptiness a child leaves behind when it hides. The library drew me again after dinner. I had the odd fancy that the room had something to say and would say it whether I were present to hear or not. I went, therefore, and found Battle there before me, studying not the desk this time, but the hearth. In the grate, a few small fragments remained among the ash, flakes of paper that had burned hungrily the edges and then, failing of draught or haste, had crisped to a stubborn legibility. Battle did not stoop. He merely looked and looked until, it seemed to me, the paper would have confessed for want of any other relief. Bad fire for burning, he observed. Damp wood, I suggested. Wrong fire, he said and straightened. At that moment the clock upon the mantel struck 9, measured, civilized strokes. Somewhere above, a woman laughed. Below, in the billiard room, a ball kissed another with precise courtesy of men who know rules. But between the clock and the sound the company there ran, for me, another sound, the soft breath of the lake moving in the dark, and the echo in my mind of Clara's voice. If one stands very still, one can persuade one's heart to believe it. I did not then know that we had come, so gently we had not felt it, to the edge of an absence. The morning broke with a clarity almost insolent after the mist. A brisk sun fell on the lawns, glittering upon dew that clung like dropped glass beads. The house stirred with the purposeful energy of a country weekend. Maids about their tasks, a gardener trundling a barrow of cuttings, the butler presiding over the silver with an air of resigned authority. Yet in all this orderly ritual, one discordant note would sound, and it would not cease. Mrs. Clara Denham did not appear at breakfast. At first her absence was treated with courtesy. Harcourt remarked that ladies were entitled to vanity's delay. Miss Latham suggested she was writing letters. Lady Eleanor murmured that Clara had seemed pale last evening. Perhaps she had taken a tray in her room. Sir Rowland, however, frowned. Punctuality to him was a marrow of discipline. An empty chair offended like a loose strap on parade. A maid was dispatched. She returned 5 minutes later, hesitating in the doorway, her cap trembling with her. "Please, my lady, Mrs. Denham's not there." "Not there," Lady Eleanor repeated softly. "Her bed's not been slept in, my lady. The suitcase is packed. Her gown from last night is laid over a chair, but there's no sign of her." The silence that followed was not shock, but something stranger, an adjustment, as if each mind silently moved a piece upon its own private board. Harcourt set down his cup with studied carelessness. Renshaw gave a little start, then busied himself with marmalade. Miss Latham's pencil scratched one swift note in her brown book. Sir Rowland pushed back his chair, the scrape harsh in the quiet. "We shall see for ourselves," he said. We ascended together to the guest corridor. Clara's door was unlocked. The room within bore the marks of departure, without preparation. The bed, smooth as when the maid had turned it down, declared it had been unslept. The gown she had worn to dinner lay neatly across a chair, the pearls coiled beside it. Her small dressing case stood closed, save for the absence of gloves. On the table a single coffee cup, untouched, cold. Renshaw frowned. "Packed bag, unslept bed, surely it is plain. The lady has gone." "Gone where?" asked Miss Latham. One does not step out of a country house before dawn with luggage under one's arm and no conveyance. Battle had said nothing. He now walked to French windows, which opened onto a stone balcony. They were unlatched. He stooped, massive and deliberate, and with a square finger touched the sill. A faint shred of silk clung there, gray, frayed, unmistakable. He held it up without comment. Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her lips. We followed him onto the balcony. The stone steps descended to the garden. There in the dew lay footprints, small, neat, and quickly lost upon the gravel path that led toward the lake. Halfway down the path they ceased. Not to verge, not continue faintly, ceased. Beyond, the grass lay unbroken, smooth as a sheet. It was as though the morning itself denied she had passed. "Curious," Battle murmured. He straightened, looked toward the line of trees, and seemed to file the thought away as one might a card in a drawer. The household searched. The stables were examined. No horse taken, no car moved. The lodgekeeper swore no one had passed the gates. The gardener questioned, had seen only a figure in the mist near the boathouse at dawn, but when challenged he could not be sure if it were man or woman, or even if it were not a trick of light upon water. By 11 o'clock unease had grown into fear. Sir Rowland gathered us in the drawing-room. His face bore the disciplined command, but his hand, resting upon the mantel, betrayed a tremor. "We must face the fact," he said heavily, "that Mrs. Denham has disappeared." Harcourt spoke smoothly. "Disappeared or departed, there is a difference." "A difference without a conveyance?" Miss Latham returned sharply. "Unless she sprouted wings." Renshaw paced, quick, restless. "She had. There may have been reasons. A letter, an assignation." Lady Eleanor turned upon him with sudden force. "You imply scandal. Clara would not have left my house in that fashion." "No scandal," Renshaw muttered, but his color rose. All eyes turned, at last, to Superintendent Battle. He stood solidly by the window, as though he had been waiting for this inevitable appeal. "We shall take it quietly," he said. "Panic spoils more than it saves." His calmness spread like oil upon troubled water, though beneath it I sensed currents no man yet saw. Battle began his inquiries with the staff. The butler had locked up at 11:30. No one had come or gone. The housemaids had seen Mrs. Denham retire after the ladies withdrew about 10:30. The night footman had walked the corridor at midnight and heard nothing. The chauffeur swore the garage had not been entered. Both motor cars stood as he had left them. Back in Clara's room, Battle examined every detail. He measured the suitcase with his eye, noted the untouched cup, the gown and pearls laid out as if their owner meant to wear them again. He touched the key on the ribbon, which now lay upon the dressing table instead of her wrist. He did not speculate aloud. He simply observed. From the hearth he lifted a scrap of paper, charred but legible at one corner. "Cannot be delayed beyond tomorrow. M.R." The initial struck like a pebble upon a window. Renshaw paled, then forced a laugh. "Any number of M.R.S. in the world. Mere coincidence." "Coincidences," Miss Latham murmured, "are the only things one may rely upon." By lunch in the house had settled into a tense expectancy. Harcourt maintained his suavity, though his hand once betrayed a tremor as he lit a cigarette. Renshaw grew sharper, restless, every remark a thrust. Lady Eleanor moved with fragile dignity, her eyes darting as though she sought Clara's figure in each doorway. Sir Rowland was grave, his soldier's instinct alive, but it was upon Battle, calm as the oaks outside, that all reliance fell. The sun shone upon the lawns, indifferent. The swan circled the lake, as it had done yesterday, as it would tomorrow. Yet a chair at the table remained empty, and the silence around was greater than all our words. Superintendent Battle did not so much take charge as allow events to find the shape his presence required. Sir Rowland, who understood command, deferred him with the relief of a man who sees a river pilot step aboard at the trickiest reach. A few quiet words to Lady Eleanor, kind, practical, sent the household to their occupations and the guests the morning room, where Battle proposed to speak to us one by one. I had the sensation, familiar to any man who has watched a competent surgeon wash his hands, that what was about to occur would be thorough, unspectacular, and final. He began with the staff. The butler, Mr. Keat, stood in the doorway with that grave impersonality which long service confers. "You locked up at 11:30? Battle asked. "As is customary, sir." "French windows of Mrs. Denham's room?" "They are latched at turn down, sir. I cannot speak for them after, unless her ladyship requested air." "Any unusual calls at the door, messages, parcels?" "None, sir. Say a note for Mr. Harcourt at tea, by hand from the village, sir." Battle nodded, and his eyes, steady, unreproachful, rested for a moment upon the butler's cuff, where a faint gray smear betrayed recent contact with the coal scuttle. "You bank the fires late?" "I do, sir." "Good." Nothing in his tone suggested suspicion, yet I felt the house yield up a small fact as a safe yields to the right number. The housemaids were next. Elsie, who had brought us the news at breakfast, curtsied and clutched her apron. "Beds turned down at 10:30, sir." Mrs. Denham said she wanted a tray, but she changed her mind when I mentioned her ladyship had rung for tea in the drawing-room. "No, no," she says, "I shall come down presently. That would be 11:15, sir." "And you saw her after?" Battle asked. No, sir. Only the night footman. Sir, walking the corridor just afore midnight. The night footman, a lank youth with the air of a penitential stork, corroborated that he had passed the corridor at 12 and again at 2, and heard nothing save at the first round, a sort of soft scrape, sir, like a chair drawn gentle. In which room? Couldn't say, sir. Sound carries up there. The chauffeur declared the motor cars had slept as soundly as babes. Petrol cap sealed, sir, he added, with the pride of a man whose honor sits beneath the bonnet. Having set the frame, Battle called the guests. Miss Latham went in first. She seated herself on the edge of a chair, hands folded upon her brown notebook, as if it were a prayer book, and she, a heretic, meant to behave in church. I shall be as helpful as my nature permits, she said. It is not in my nature to be unhelpful, merely precise. You spoke with Mrs. Denham last night? Battle asked. In passing, Miss Latham replied. She admired a gramophone record. I told her the recording favored the strings over the woodwinds. She smiled in that accommodating way she had and said, You notice everything. It was praise and offense in one sentence. A clever woman. What time did you go up? 10:30. And you heard? The house. Houses speak. A drawer. Somewhere open, a sound as discreet as a sigh. A door that thought it was closing without attention. I wrote 3 lines and slept on them. You write at night? When the day refuses to arrange itself, she said. Do you think her dead, Superintendent? I think her absent, he returned, which leaves room for hope and doubt enough for anyone. She inclined her head, satisfied by the shape of that sentence, and went out. Renshaw entered with the air of a man who expects to be maligned and prefers to be first. He stood until Battle indicated a chair, and then sat as if he had objected on principle and lost on a technicality. You were in the billiard room until 20 to 11, Renshaw said crisply. Sir Rowland can confirm. I then went to the library to fetch a law report from my case bag. I found no report and concluded I had mispacked. You spoke with Mrs. Denham last night? A word, he said and colored. This morning at tea I intended to advise her, purely as a matter of prudence, about certain arrangements she had mentioned. She seemed disinclined to receive advice. What arrangements? Renshaw's jaw set. You will forgive me. A gentleman does not repeat a lady's confidences. Quite right, Battle said placidly. Fortunately, I am patient, and confidences have a way of repeating themselves. Let us hope so, Renshaw answered, not without heat. Harcourt came next, urbane, faintly smiling, a polished shoe of a man. He chose his chair as a hostess chooses flowers. A deplorable business, he murmured. I am distressed. You received a note yesterday, Battle observed, from the village. A trifling legal matter, Harcourt said smoothly. A deed misfiled. I drove down after tea. At what hour did you return? A little before 7. Dinner was at 8. I dressed. After dinner, billiards. Later, letters in the library. I retired at 11. You saw Mrs. Denham in the library? Battle's tone did not change. Harcourt's eyes, dark, intelligent, did not for a fraction follow his mouth. We crossed paths, he said lightly. A few words of good night. Did she ask your advice? Mrs. Denham found me amiable company, he said with a small laugh. Many do. Battle let that lie as a fisherman. Let's a bait sink. And this morning? Shock, Superintendent, Harcourt said, spreading his hands. Shock cloaked in mystery. One hopes the lady has merely fled some private difficulty, and will soon send word. Fled to where? To discretion, he returned neatly. It is a common destination. Battle wrote nothing. He looked at Harcourt as one looks at a clock, to see not the time but whether the hands truly move. Lady Eleanor and Sir Rowland gave their accounts with that courtesy which makes truth easier to bear. Lady Eleanor had gone up early, wrote 2 notes, and slept badly. Sir Rowland had consulted the estate books with the agent until 10:15, joined the gentleman for a turn at the table, and gone up at 11. If I had known, he said quietly, I would have sat outside her door all night. Not necessary, Battle answered. We shall need your steadiness more than your vigil. When my own turn came, I told, as closely as I could, what I had seen. The half-closed drawer in the library, the ash small as a hesitation, the boathouse with its patient padlock, Clara by the lake with the key at her wrist. Battle listened, half-closed eyes on my words, as if they were flies, and he, an angler, watched the pattern upon the stream. You notice small things, he said, when I had done. I noticed the wrong small things, I confessed. The sort that make a paragraph but not a case. They make both, he said, but the paragraph is quicker. He dismissed me with a nod and went back to work. I lingered in the corridor and, as men will when relief and anxiety exchange places, drifted to the library. The fire had been relayed. The grate, now cold, held only ash. Upon the desk a sheet of Caroon notepaper lay bare save for the embossed crest, and near the corner, the faint ring of a glass. A cigarette stump, crushed with unnecessary care, sat in the tray, a brand I had not seen Harcourt smoke. I turned and found Battle at my shoulder, large as a cupboard and twice as dependable. Odd, I said. He regarded the cigarette. Oddities deceive, he said. Unless there are many, then they become manners. Do you suppose she left a note? I asked. If she did, he said. The house failed to keep it. Houses keep what they want. We reconvened briefly in the drawing-room, where Sir Rowland, obeying some ancient rule that English problems require English tea, had ordered a tray. Conversation fluttered like a trapped bird and then stilled when Battle entered. He addressed us without preamble, not pontifical but plain. Time, if you please. Last definite sighting of Mrs. Denham. After 10:30, when she declined a tray and said she would come down. A probable sighting by the gardener near the boathouse at dawn. Not certain. French windows unlatched in her room. Footprints to the gravel. Their ending. No horse taken. No car used. Lodge not opened. In the library, late, someone burned a paper. We have a fragment. Cannot be delayed beyond tomorrow, M.R. We shall take statements and search the grounds thoroughly. I'd be obliged if guests remain at Greyfriars. Harcourt's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Are we suspects? You are guests, Battle said. It's a tiresome thing to be both. Renshaw sprang up. I object to the innuendo, those initials. No innuendo, Battle returned, unmoved. Just letters. Plenty of MRS in the world. Miss Latham's pencil made its neat scratch. And some at this very table, she observed. Lady Eleanor flinched. Sir Rowland's hand closed upon the arm of his chair. That will do, Miss Latham. It will. Battle agreed placidly. We'll leave letters to speak in their own time. The search of the grounds commenced in earnest after tea. Battle directed it with an economy that would have pleased Wellington. Gardeners in pairs across the meadows, men to the wood, women to the shrubbery paths, where a careful I might read what a boot had written. I accompanied him as far as the garden gate that opens on the path round the lake. He paused there, stooped, and examined the rough, weather-silvered wood. What is it? I asked. Nothing yet, he said. But nothing wears a particular look when it's pretending to be something. He straightened, eyes traveling to the island where the alder leaves quivered like small coins. We'll take a boat after, he added. As we turned back, the kitchen maid came running, breathless with that mixture of fear and triumph servants bring to their betters when news has chosen them. Please, sir. Superintendent, sir. The fireplace in the small sitting room. The back drawing room. There's more bits of old paper, sir, what the housemaid missed. And something shiny what rolled under the fender. Battle did not hurry his stride, but the air about him tightened as a drum tightens to the stick. Thank you, he said. We'll look. It was, I thought, the first sound of the case beginning to speak. The small back drawing-room had the modest respectability of a maiden-aunt, a place for embroidery and letters, not dramas. Yet there the housemaid knelt, proud and frightened, pointing beneath the fender where something had flashed treacherously at her broom. Battle crouched, a slow, inevitable descent, like a pier settling to the tide, and drew out the object with 2 square fingers. It was a metal matchbook, smart and thin, with the name of a London club enameled upon it. The Cardigan, a haunt I knew, of those who liked their speculations wet and their dinners dry. On the inner lip a narrow stripe of dark grease marked where a thumb had worried it open and shut. Open and shut. Gentleman's habit, Battle said mildly. Nervous men have hands they think no one sees. In the grate, among crumbs of ash that the earlier search had missed, lay 3 oddments of paper, warped into little boats by the heat. The first bore the tail of the sentence, "Not at the house. Same place, same hour." The second, no names, you'll understand. The third was part cheap envelope blue-ruled, with a smeared pencil scrawl. Both. The torn edge teased one into completing the word. "The boathouse," I said. "Or the boatman," Miss Latham suggested, appearing soundlessly at my shoulder like a footnote that improves the page. "But we are sure river." "Let's not be short of a look," Battle replied. He slipped the matchbook into an envelope, the fragments into another, and thanked the housemaid as though she had lent him twine. We went at once by the shrubbery path, that sly, shifting ribbon of green, to the lake. The wind had freshened. The alder leaves trembled like small coins debating their allegiance. The boathouse waited, patient, low, its old brass padlock dull as a sermon. Battle examined the lock, without touching it. "New scratch," he observed after a moment, pointing with a pencil to a bright nick where metal had lately kissed metal hard. "Somebody tried to hurry a key that didn't want hurrying, then thought better of it, or found the knack." He stepped to the threshold and breathed, if I may use the word, with his eyes, down at the sill where grit memorizes feet, up to the lintel where hands forget themselves. "Not forced," he said. "Opened." He did not open it. Instead, we circled the lake on the outer path, coming at last to the wicket gate, where yesterday I had seen Clara wind that wisp of silk about her finger. The rough would offer up a new confession. A few gray fibers caught in the splintered grain, fine as cobweb and, to my mind, horribly intimate. Battle held them flat upon his palm. "Scarf silk," he said, "and the same color we found on the window." She could have torn it merely by carelessness. I ventured. "She could," he agreed, "and often people do. That's why we keep such things in our minds, until they start to know one another." From the gate we followed the narrow track to the summer house, a circular timber folly with a peeling green roof, placed, as such follies are, to improve prospects even when rain improves them already. The door complained faintly when Battle pushed it. Within, the air had that faint damp fog of old books and older afternoons. On the bench lay a scattering of dead leaves, and, in their midst, the gleam that makes a heart beat faster not for beauty, but for narrative. "A cigarette case," I said. "Brass, with a shallow dent in one corner, and on the lid, initials intertwined with engravers' attempt at eloquence. M.R. Renshaw." Miss Latham gave a low whistle, which did not suit her, and which she therefore enjoyed. "How admirably letters behave," she murmured. "They point, they accuse, they hold their tongues." Battle did not open the case. He regarded it as a naturalist regards a specimen he intends to label but not disturb. "We'll let Mr. Renshaw tell us where it ought to be," he said, and wrapped it carefully in his handkerchief. As we came out, the gardener, the same square fellow who had seen a dawn figure that might have been man, woman, or meteorological fancy, stood cap in hands at the path. "Beggin' pardon, sir," he addressed Battle. "If you're looking for marks, there's some by the side gate what goes to the lane. I didn't like to trouble you afore I'd had another look." We went. The side gate, a practical afterthought in a wall that otherwise prefers theory, opened to a narrow lane thick with last year's leaves flattened to a leather by passing tires. On the inner side, just where the gate meets the hinge post, the ground showed 2 small abrasions, fresh and pale on the darker soil. A carriage step? No, I am no tracker, but I have handled luggage enough to know the scrape of a valise set down in haste and lifted again. Battles I lingered on the gate top. He drew his finger along, brought it away with a small smutch of grease and grit. "Gate's been open since the last rain," he said, "though the lodge didn't see a car through the front. Small parcels use small doors." "Then she was carried?" I asked. "Or she walked with help," he said. "Or she sent her bag and kept herself. There are choices in it. We were not destined that hour to settle any." Sir Rowland's summons reached us before we had made the turn back to the lawns. Battle wanted in the library. We found him, curiously flushed for so restrained a man, by the central table, where a small pyramid of Clara Denham's books had been set to one side. Lady Eleanor stood near, color high, one hand pressed flat upon the polished wood as though steadying a sea. "I was having her things put aside," she said, not looking at me. "There's a novel by Mrs. Gaskell." It was always in her hands. When Mrs. Lethbridge dusted it, a paper fell. On the blotter lay a letter, folded once, its creases careful as accounted money. Battle unfolded it with that delicate bluntness which is his paradox. The paper was cheap, the hand quick and feminine. Only the salutation and signature were plain, the heart too quickly written to be disguised. "Dearest E." The ending, "Yours, Clara." Between, a few sentences that changed the temperature of the room. "I cannot carry it alone. You of all people will understand the risk to your name. But there must be truth, at last. If you won't come to the boathouse at 11, then I must do it myself, and God forgive us both." Lady Eleanor's hand left the table. She stepped back as if her name had pushed her. "I had no letter," she whispered. "I had no letter. She never wrote to me." Miss Latham, whose tact as a blade padded in velvet, lowered her eyes. Sir Rowland stared before him. The discipline of the parade ground will not teach a man what to do when his wife's initial is a summons to scandal. Battle read the lines again and slid the letter into its envelope. "Dearest E," he said, neither question nor assertion. Then very gently, "Your ladyship, can you think of any other E who might be dearest of Mrs. Denham?" Eleanor lifted her face with difficulty, like a swimmer shaken by cold. "My maiden name was Ellerton," she said. "But Clara never called me anything but Eleanor. There is the vicar, Edwin Morley, the village solicitor, Edmund Ellison, Beatrice." "Beatrice is A.B.," Miss Latham supplied gravely. "Alas!" Battle nodded, accepting both the hurt and the humor. "We won't press it," he said. "Not yet." He turned to Sir Rowland. "With your permission, we'll continue with the grounds. The lake, especially." Permission was given. The men went to fetch poles in a line. The gardeners, grateful for usefulness, moved with that sober haste the English bring to unpleasant duties. I remained with Lady Eleanor, who stood quite still until the hall clock struck the quarter. Then she sat, and her hand found mine as though I had been her child. "I did not know," she said simply. "I believe you," I answered, and was almost surprised to find that I did. Her grief had no drama in it, only that tired courage the well-bred apply to disasters as to drafts. Battle's search of the island yielded nothing but water-hen nests and a sandwich tin every estate possesses. The boat scraped the shingle. Men heaved, wiped hands, said sir, and dispersed. By 4 o'clock the sky had lowered. A filmy rain, finer than mist and more determined than drizzle, began to thread the air. The house accepted lamps. Renshaw, summoned to the library, paled when Battle set the brass cigarette case upon the table. How came that there? "In the summer house," Battle said. Renshaw wet his lips. "I lost it yesterday, this morning. I cannot be sure. I looked for it. I did not find it. You didn't mention it." Battle observed. "One doesn't rush about crying. I have mislaid my property in a house already disturbed." Renshaw snapped. "Besides, it is of no consequence." "Nothing is," Miss Latham murmured, "until it hangs a man." "Miss Latham," Sir Rowland said sharply. Renshaw clutched the case. "It proves nothing. Anyone could have put it there." "Quite so," Battle replied, so placidly that Renshaw's indignation had nowhere to land. "It proves nothing on its own. Things prefer company." Harcourt arrived as Renshaw departed, and Battle, without flourish, showed him the Cardigan Club matchbook. Harcourt's smile thinned. "Very common. They litter the place. I may have dropped one. Or Miss Latham. Perhaps Superintendent Battle carries one and plants it where it pleases him." Battle looked at him as a plow looks at an unpromising field. "I don't plant things," he said. "I wait for them to flower." The rain sharpened against the windows. Tea came and went. Somewhere in the house a maid cried softly, and another soothed her with that mixture of kindness and scold which heals servants and children. Evening came early, the hour when rooms draw near one another, and words do not carry well. I found Battle later at the garden gate, the rough one where Silk had snagged. He stood with his hands behind him, head bent, as if reading a page others could not see. "There's a story here," he said when he heard my step, "but it's told out of order. We'll have to put the sentences straight. Do you believe Mrs. Denham is alive?" I asked. "I believe," he said, "in what people keep forgetting to hide." He glanced toward the lake, where the last of the light lay like pewter. "Tomorrow we'll open the boathouse. If it's empty, that'll be something. If it isn't—" He did not finish. A gust ran through the yews as if an invisible hand had passed over them, and a single torn thread, gray as a breath, lifted from the gate and drifted away. We were summoned just after 9, the hour when rooms at Greyfriars draw closer and voices carry uneasily. Sir Rowland, grave and resolute, stood by the mantel as though the house were on parade. Lady Eleanor sat slightly apart, composed as a woman on whom a verdict already rests. Miss Latham hovered at the edge of the firelight, pencil tucked behind her ear like a hairpin. Harcourt lounged with artistry in a wing chair, Renshaw proud, all angles and impatience. Superintendent Battle had his back to the long windows. Beyond him the night pressed its broad, quiet face against the glass. "If you please," he said, in that mild, iron bar of a voice, "we'll put the sentences of this business in their proper order." No one spoke. He glanced once at Sir Rowland, who inclined his head as a man signs a necessary order. "Mrs. Denham is not dead." Battle began. "She is absent by compulsion and by contrivance. Both will be remedied." Lady Eleanor's hands closed together. I felt the relief move through the room like air after a shutter is opened. Harcourt's eyelids did not so much flicker as remember how. Battle went on. "Start with the window. Silk torn on the sill, more silk at the garden gate. Those are not the marks of a woman running. They're the marks of a woman who is helped or hindered across rough wood. Footprints in the dew end where the gravel begins. No mystery in that. Gravel is a stingy witness. But close by there's a side gate to the lane." He nodded to me. I recalled the pale scrapes on the soil, the grease along the gate top. That gate was open in the night. Something was set down briefly and lifted again. Luggage, I should say. A small car could wait there with its lamps out. The lodge never saw it. Renshaw drew breath to argue, then thought better of it. Miss Latham's eyes, very bright, never left Battle's face. "Next," said Battle, "we'll speak of letters. In the back drawing-room, burnt fragments. Not the house, same place, same hour, and no names. You'll understand. Those aren't the wordy arrangements of a lady's elopement. That's caution. Then there's a letter we found in Mrs. Denham's book. Dearest E., if you won't come to the boathouse at 11, I must do it myself, and God forgive us both. That letter was never delivered. It was meant for your ladyship." He turned to Lady Eleanor, respectful as a parish beadle. "Mrs. Denham had something to tell you that would touch your name. She trusted you to stand by her." Lady Eleanor's composure wavered. "I had no letter," she whispered again, as if fighting the past or present. "I had none." "No," said Battle quietly. "Someone intercepted it before it reached you." His gaze moved to Harcourt without haste, as one moves a bishop along a diagonal prepared an hour ago. "Mr. Harcourt belongs to the Cardigan Club." He held up the enameled matchbook in its envelope. He dealt with his letters in the back drawing-room after dinner. There are his habits on the metal, and there's the ashes kind of cigarette leaves. He knew, then, of the appointment at the boathouse. He wanted to keep it. Harcourt's smile was a half-closed knife. "Really, Superintendent." Battle didn't lift his voice. "You were seen walking toward the lake between 10:30 and 11 by more than the mist, sir. You told the house a tidy story this morning. Misfiled deed, drive to the village, a man busy being important. But that note by hand at tea, that little village errand." He tapped the envelope with square forefinger. "That put you on your guard. You were watching messages." Harcourt's gaze drifted to Sir Rowland with practiced sympathy. "I am accused, it seems, of omniscience. An enviable fault. He laughed, a controlled, dark ripple. And what of this? The fragments with MR, the cigarette case bearing the same. Surely the superintendent's net has a barrister within it. Renshaw flushed angrily. A clumsy plant. Just so, Battle agreed, so placidly that Renshaw's temper had to find a new perch. The burnt scrap with MR and the brass case in Summer House. Those don't accuse, they advertise. They were left to be found. Mr. Renshaw is a vain man. He is not a fool. If he meant harm, he wouldn't initial it. A tight sound escaped Renshaw that might have been relief or rage. Battle continued, as if reciting a drill he trusted. Mrs. Denham was not running to romance. She was running to witness. She held proofs, papers, which showed, among other things, that Mr. Harcourt's speculations had been shored up with promises he had no right to make. There's a pretty phrase in the city for it. Support from friends, until the friends discover their names attached to guarantees they never signed. Mrs. Denham knew. She intended to tell Lady Eleanor, to warn this house before its name was used to prop a crooked wall. Harcourt's voice was silk over iron. And how? Superintendent, did a charming widow come by the city wisdom? Because, said Battle, charming widows are often required to learn unpleasant facts. Her late husband was one of your stepping stones, Mr. Harcourt. He drowned under you. She didn't. No one moved. The house seemed to listen more closely. She arranged a meeting at the boathouse at 11. Battle went on. She asked Lady Eleanor, dearest E, to come. The letter never reached her ladyship. Someone else came instead, armed with persuasion, and a car at the lane. Mrs. Denham had thought to make a tidy scene of discovery this morning. Footsteps, scarf, and empty bed. To pull the house's attention to where the truth would be. But she was forestalled. Miss Latham's voice, soft as a page turning. She staged her own vanishing and was abducted during the staging. Battle inclined his heavy head. It can happen to the clever. She unlatched her own window to save time and a point. She snagged her scarf on the gate yesterday by chance, and again last night by intention. But she didn't reckon on someone who had read her letter first and meant to keep her quiet until some tidy arrangements were set. Harcourt rose in a single control motion and crossed the sideboard as if to pour himself a drink. This is theatricals, he said lightly. You paint me with a novelist's brush. You have no proof. Proof is in the way of coming, said Battle. His gaze did not leave Harcourt. Your matchbook is a trifle. Your tire marks in the lane, 2 narrow tracks where the leaves are new or flattened, are a heavier trifle. Your quarrel with Mr. Renshaw yesterday, heard from the U-Walk, makes motive enough, for there is money and reputation on the table. But what matters most is something you forgot. When men do wickedly, they tie to the wrong things. Harcourt set down the decanter without pouring. Enlighten us, he said, but the suavity frayed. In the library last night, Battle replied, someone tried to burn a letter. The paper we found was cheap, the hand quick. The edges scorched all round but for one corner, torn away before the burning. If a man wants to destroy a letter, he burns it whole. If he wants to keep a name, he tears out the salutation and burns the rest. This morning a letter with no salutation was found in Mrs. Denham's book. That's the missing corner. You didn't dare keep dearest E in your pocket, Mr. Harcourt. So when you realized your mistake, you put the body of the letter back where the house might find it, without the greeting to show what you'd taken. A small sound escaped Lady Eleanor, as much triumph as pain can carry. Sir Rowland's hand closed once upon the mantle and let go. Harcourt's color had altered by a shade one might not have noticed if one had not been watching for that exact shade since dinner yesterday. Battle's tone did not alter. At the boathouse you did not find Lady Eleanor, but Mrs. Denham. You tried to persuade her to leave quietly for a day or two while you put certain papers right. She refused. You took her bag to the side gate and meant to take her too. But something, noise at the house, a servant near the path, put you off. So you put her where she could not call out without betraying herself and you, locked in a space already locked. He paused. The boathouse will do for that. You have a key? Harcourt asked, almost cheerfully now. A warrant? A judge tucked away in your pocketbook? You spin fables, Superintendent. I've a pair of bolt croppers in the gardener's shed, said Battle, as if discussing boots, and a justice of the peace in the next village who has known me 20 years. I thought it fair to tell you before we fetch both. Silence settled, a thick, listening silence to which I perceived, curiously distinct, the softness of the fire and the minute crackle of one log against another. Renshaw had ceased to prowl. Miss Latham's pencil lay idle in her hand, as if words would spoil the clean line of what would happen next. It was Harcourt who moved first. Men of his sort hate stillness. He smiled, that narrow professional smile which promises settlement out of court. Suppose, he said, your bolt croppers discover nothing. Suppose your boathouse contains only spiders and the honest damp. Suppose Mrs. Denham has fled to discretion, as I suggested this morning. Where are you then, Superintendent? In the right place, Battle said, for the truth will be where it was left. If not in the boathouse, then in the car that waited. If not in the car, then in the club ledger where your notes sit. If not there, then in the bank manager's desk, who can tell me who guaranteed your paper and who didn't. We'll follow the quiet facts. They don't run. He turned to Sir Rowland. With your permission, I'll ask your gardener and 2 men to meet me at the lake in 10 minutes. I'll take Mr. Keat for a witness and Mr. Renshaw, if he cares to be present. Miss Latham, you'll keep Lady Eleanor company. Mr. Harcourt, he looked at him squarely, you'll come with me. It's time you watched someone else keep time. Harcourt looked from Battle to the window and back again. For a moment his face was naked. No city mask. Only the tired, frightened scorn of a man who has built his house on cleverness and hears the water in the foundations. Very well, he said, and the laugh that followed was all blade. Let's open your fairy tale shed. Battle nodded, as a man acknowledges the end of a drill. We'll open it, he said, and then we'll all be quieter. The rain had stopped by the time we reached the lake, though the grass held its glittering tears. The boathouse crouched upon the shingle, its brass padlock dull in the lantern glow. Battle stood squarely before it, bolt cutters in his hands like a farmer with a tool for mending fences. Harcourt, pale but erect, kept a studied nonchalance. Renshaw, restless, muttered about legality until Sir Rowland silenced with a look that had once stilled a regiment. The bolt gave way with a clean snap. The door creaked, sighed, and swung inward upon darkness thick with damp. For an instant there was nothing but the echo of water lapping under boards. Then the lantern showed us a figure upon the bench at the far wall, rising slowly with a cry half relief, half terror. It was Clara Denham. Her dress was creased, her hair tumbled, but her composure, curiously, was intact. She clutched the key upon its ribbon still, as if it had been her talisman. "You found me," she whispered. "At last." Lady Eleanor, who had insisted on coming despite Battle's caution, caught her in her arms. The 2 women held one another, as though an old grief had been lifted between them. The rest of us stood aside. There are moments when propriety bows to nature. Battle asked only one question. "He locked you in?" "Yes," she said steadily. "He told me it was for my safety, that men were searching, that scandal would be ruinous. He promised it was only for a day. But the lock was outside, Superintendent. A woman knows when she is trusted and when she is not." Harcourt said nothing. He stared at the floor, his suavity discarded like a hat that no longer fits. When Sir Rowland moved toward him, Battle lifted a hand. "Best left. Sir Rowland, the law will carry him further than a blow." By the next afternoon, the village constable had Harcourt in custody and the papers secured. The tale was plain. Forged guarantees, failing companies, and a scheme to silence the one woman who had pieced it together. His polished charm had carried him far. It could not carry him past Superintendent Battle. Clara recovered quickly, though she would not speak of the hours in the boathouse, save to say that silence can bruise as much as blows. Lady Eleanor kept her close, and I think something deep and unspoken passed between them. Perhaps the bond of women who know how society sharpens scandal against their names. Miss Latham, for once, refrained from comment. Her pencil wrote swiftly instead. Sir Rowland, when all was orderly again, thanked Battle with the sincerity of a soldier. "You came as a friend," he said, and you leave as the man who preserved our honor. Battle, as ever, took it quietly. I did my work, he said. Honor keeps itself, Sir Roland. It only needs clearing when dust settles. The weekend ended under calmer skies. Guests departed with farewells that were courteous but subdued, each carrying away some private reckoning. Renshaw, shaken but not disgraced, promised discretion. Miss Latham pressed her brown book upon me. A tale improves when retold by another tongue, she said, and smiled. Clara Denham lingered, her future uncertain but her step lighter. Lady Eleanor kissed her gently, as a mother might. As for Battle, he left without ceremony, his square figure diminishing along the gravel drive until it was only part of the landscape, like a milestone or a gatepost. Quiet men, I reflected, alter destinies not by brilliance, but by remaining immovable until truth has no choice but to stand beside them. Greyfriars Hall returned to its routine. Fires tended, roses pruned, carpets beaten. Yet for those who had sat at that table, there was a knowledge that a woman may vanish not only into death but into secrecy, and that to bring her back requires patience, observation, and the still strength of Superintendent Battle. Thank you for joining us for the Vanishing Weekend Guest, a Superintendent Battle Mystery. If you enjoyed this classic-style detective tale, be sure to subscribe for more stories every day here at Sleep Cafe. Your comments and support mean the world, and I look forward to sharing many more mysteries with you. Until next time, keep a light burning and stay curious.